and
Hello.
welcome to episode 103 of the City Brew Tours podcast, where we explore the best craft beer scenes across the United States. I'm your host, Brian. Hello, and welcome back for another week where we're featuring the wonderful city of Grand Rapids, Michigan. So happy to be joined once again by my co-host for these episodes, Glenn Stoops. Glenn, how's it going?
Oh, it's going great, Brian. I'm really happy to be back here again. And everyone knows about my predilection for the darker beers. So it was kind of a very excited. I was prepared to wait until the end of the month, but very excited to get to this stout because the moment I took this one out of the box, I'm like, oh, that's the only one. Okay, I'm down for it. I'm good for it. And then here we get it on week 4. So even better.
This is the beer of the month for you.
Oh yeah.
Let's go. I'm excited for your excitement. Love the energy. Before we get started here, and talk about what we're going to talk about tonight, get into our beer and our discussion topic for tonight, I do want to take a moment to talk about something that's a kind of a shitty that happened in the beer world this past week. A lot of people that follow this podcast and follow beer memes, the world of beer meming, certainly are familiar with the page Don't Drink Beers. Alex Kidd is the person behind that page, and he has made numerous funny, silly beer memes, and has also created a style of writing about beer that wasn't pretentious but still serious, and took beer seriously, but was fun in all the right ways. And unfortunately, Alex went into the hospital last week and found out that he has stage 4 cancer that has spread to another part of his body, and he is in recovery. He has a long road ahead. He had emergency surgery last week, and although I wouldn't say that Alex is a friend of this show, he and I have spoken about various beer things in the past. He is certainly influential on this show and on my relationship with beer and the beer industry, and then how we talk about beer in a serious but funny way. So I'm throwing a link in the chat here. I normally don't do this stuff. We'll also post a link in the episode description, but he is organizing a GoFundMe to help with the medical bills and the family's future, as Alex was the also, a working parent that has a very young kid. So any donations that people could give, we know times are tough for everybody right now, but anything that you could give would be greatly appreciated to help out somebody that is definitely so important to the beer community, and a lot of people that have guested on this show and a lot of people behind this show. So thanks for letting me get up on my soapbox there. Boom. I don't know why I said boom. That's a really weird way to transition, but
There's all kinds of segues.
Yeah, there's all kinds of segues, Glenn, but mainly there's good ones and there's bad ones, and I'm really good at bringing as many bad ones as I can. So tonight we're going to be featuring our friends again at Brewery. Next, this is an all gluten-free brewery out of Grand Rapids, Michigan. We are going to be drinking their stout, and I know my friend Captain Porter Brown Stout is going to be excited to drink this beer. We also have a fun discussion.
I can confirm that, yeah.
That ties into the Grand Rapids beer scene and the beer scene at large, and will just be a good conversation for tonight's episode. But Glenn, my finger is itching on the tab of this can. Like
I think everyone heard mine already open.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's get into this beer. Brewery Nix's stout, a 5.5%. I don't know if they can. I don't think they consider this an American stout.
That's a good question.
At 5.5%, I think that's a little low for an American stout. But cheers, Glenn. Cheers, everyone at home.
If cheers, it's low, it's not very far below it. I mean, American stouts generally are about around, they top out around 6-ish%, I think.
Oh no, they're higher. It's 7-8% high ABV, high IBUs. Which
my feeling is if you get much over 8%, starts to go into the foreign export stout category.
Yeah, but the reason it's American and like every other American style is because some American brewer was like, let's throw a shitload of hops into this beer. And American Stout has an IBU range of like 40 to 90 or something
Yeah.
absurd like that. So I think this is definitely done like an American Stout. I get that nice, robust bitterness coming through that's like really heavily supporting the coffee notes and the aroma and the flavor. And again, like we said this the last time we featured Brewery Nicks. If you didn't hear that episode, go back. Episode 101. We featured both Jess and Dale from Brewery Nicks coming on to talk to us. This is an all gluten-free beer, and it doesn't taste like it.
Not remotely. No, this is a really
Mm.
solid American stout. It's got those, you mentioned the robustness. It's got a nice roasty flavor to it. Coffee notes are really strong in it. It's just a really solidly done strong stout.
Yeah, and I believe there's no coffee in this. They in the ingredients they just list water, millet, buckwheat, rice, certified gluten-free oats, sunflower seeds,
Ooh,
hops, and yeast. That's an interesting ingredient.
well, that's interesting. I do not see. I don't know where. I'm looking at the wrong part of the can because I did not see sunflower seeds on my can. I can see the water, millet, rice, buckwheat. Anyway, we know from our conversation with them 2 weeks ago that they're wizards there. So it
Yeah.
does not surprise me that they're able to get this incredible flavor without having any adjuncts. It's just really they know how to put their ingredients together in some kind of wondrous alchemy.
Yeah, great brew team they have there over at Brewery Nicks, and great team. Go back and listen to episode 101 if you haven't listened to it already. I don't know why you wouldn't have intend for these to be listened sequentially, but yeah. Cheers to Beer Club subscribers for drinking this beer along with us. This is a great night to have a wonderful low ABV stout with everybody. So cheers.
Cheers.
Mm. Oh, it's like milky smooth.
It's really,
So
really
amazing.
great.
Yeah, so discussion. Glenn, I had something I wanted to talk about tonight. Ties
Yes.
into the beer style we're drinking tonight. It ties into the city we're featuring this month of Grand Rapids, Michigan. But earlier this month, I found this article um, from foodandwine.com called The 25 Most Important American Craft Beers Ever Brewed. And it ranks these 25 beers that the author determined were the most influential in the American craft beer scene. And there's some obvious heavy hitters on here. Glenn, you want to go through a couple of these while I actually?
Yeah. I was looking at that list when you sent it to me, and there are a lot of them that I'm familiar with. There's some that I'm not as familiar with as I thought I might be. And like it's interesting. Obviously this is clearly a subjective sort of list, and I think I see that this is put together by a panel from people from all over.
Yeah, I should have said
one
authors.
the only one of these names that I know is Joshua Bernstein, who I've met. But a lot of these other ones are. But some of the ones, like I feel like there's a bit. Some of them might be more West Coast. Some of them might be more Midwest. Like for instance, I'm a little skeptical as to how there was a Three Floyds beer. Though, let me see if I can try and find that one.
Yeah, flower power.
No, that was the Ithaca one, which I agree. That's one I've
Dark
seen
Lord.
a lot. And so, yeah, so a lot of these ones I absolutely believe are influential. That was the first one that I looked at that I thought, well, this looks like an amazing beer that I want to have that I've never heard of before. But I wonder on a national basis how influential it is.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Let's just give a rundown of the top 10 here, just for context for people.
Okay.
So number 10 is New Albion Ale. If you don't know that, that's an extremely influential brewery from California in the 70s, inspired brewers at, little known places such as Anchor and Sierra Nevada. And also a guy named Jim Cook, who would go on to found Sam Adams, not that big of a deal. Definitely deserves to be in that top 10. Victory Prima Pills at number 9. Three Floyds Dark Lord right after that. Russian River Pliny the Elder, Anchor Liberty Ale, Alchemist Heady Topper, Allagash White, Goose Island Bourbon County Brand Stout, Sam Adams Boston Lager, and Sierra Nevada Pale Ale. Yeah, so it's, the Three Floyds one did stick out to me, but I have 3 main bones to pick with this list. I think it's a great list. I think it's very comprehensive. The surprising beers that were on there had great explanations. The surprising beers for me had great explanations as to why. For instance, Celis White, which is a beer that was brewed in Austin, Texas, and never really gained popularity around Pittsburgh enough that it was influential when I came into craft beer around 2007, 2008. But it influenced Miller Coors, who would go on to start a company called Blue Moon, or start a brand called Blue Moon, and that brand would blow up and almost spell demise for Celis White. But my 3 bones to pick. Number 1, Ithaca Flower Power IPA and Victory Hop Devil IPA are both on here, but Two Hearted is not on here. Bell's Two Hearted is I think neck and neck with Pliny the Elder as the 2 most influential IPAs in American history. Straight up American IPAs. We'll get to my other
IPA
so that's caveat in a second.
That's why we're not including the patient 0 of the Hazy IPA. That's on this list.
Yes.
And everyone in this room knows what we'll get to that, which is why you were being coy, because everyone knows what beer we're talking about.
Absolutely. Yeah. Two Hearted Ale is American IPA perfection, and it is most certainly influential. It went back and forth for many years with Pliny the Elder as the consensus best IPA in the United States, and so that would be my number 1 gripe. I feel like they should have made it on this list. Number 2 gripe, is we have alluded to before, is Alchemist Heady Topper at number 5. I think is absurd. I think other than Sam Adams Boston Lager and Sierra Nevada Pale Ale, Heady Topper is undoubtedly the most influential craft beer in America.
Oh, I see. You're saying absurd because it's too low on the list, not because it shouldn't be. It should be higher up.
It's too low. It cannot pass Boston Lager or Pale Ale because those literally have 4 decades of influence. They are the foundation for which American craft beer was built on.
Similarly, I would say that's why Anchor is so strongly represented on this, because they were one of the earlier craft brewers.
And none of those single ships coming out of Anchor, no pun intended, rose as high as Boston Lager or Pale Ale, but Anchor Steam, Anchor Christmas, and Anchor Porter, the first American craft porter released in 1972, are groundbreaking beers. I'm surprised Liberty Ale isn't on here either. The Liberty Ale you could make a good case for Liberty Ale to go on here too.
What about some of the Stone ones? I feel like they were sort of like ahead of the game to some degree with some of their IPAs.
Yeah,
like Arrogant Bastard.
Arrogant Bastard, definitely.
I mean, I think that they've had a pretty sizable influence in that. Like, I think before we all shifted over to hazy IPAs, I thought they were like some of the more influential ones as far as West Coast IPAs go.
I would say most certainly. I would agree with that. I wouldn't be surprised if Ruination or Arrogant Bastard was on this list. That wouldn't be a gripe for me, I don't think. But Heady Topper, I need to say this and need to proselytize about the Alchemist and its founder, John Kimmick, who just happens to be from a little town called Pittsburgh. All of these beers on here are hugely influential. Boston Lager and Sierra Nevada Pale Ale, 4 decades of influence, like I said, but no single beer on here has completely upended the entire landscape of the industry's most popular style. For context, IPA throughout the last 15 years has been anywhere from 60 to 80% of the American craft beer market. It is the number 1 style. As much as people want to make jokes that every beer needs to be an IPA, it's what people buy and it's what drives the market. And in the mid 2010s, what drove that IPA market was West Coast IPA. dry, bitter, extremely hop forward, and extremely not palatable. We mentioned Arrogant Bastard already. There was a big long explanation on the back of that bottle that basically was like, you're not worthy of this beer. And John Kimmick comes along from The Alchemist and releases Heady Topper, which is this soft, palatable, still bitter, but not as bitter as everything else on that market at the time. And everyone takes notice, and it completely changes to where I remember in 2017 when the first brewery opened in my hometown that brewed exclusively New England IPAs came out and said, we're going to brew nothing but New England IPAs, Dancing Gnome. And once they opened, everyone took notice. And I'm not going to say that like Dancing Gnome had this influence, but you could see the influence from places like The Alchemist and eventually Hill Farmstead and Trillium and Bissell Brothers and Treehouse had on all these breweries that opened in 2017 and 2018. And you cannot walk into it. You would be hard pressed to walk into a brewery and not find a New England style IPA, or not find an IPA that has the influence of New England IPA on it. Talking, active fermentation, dry hopping, heavy use of English strains to push up the esters, and soft, palatable, approachable bitterness in the beer. So that's I'm going to step down off my second soapbox for the.
I will say, when I referred to Heady Topper as Patient Zero, I can't claim credit for that. What's the name of the guy who wrote the Beer Bible and who writes Beervana, which is what's that guy's name, Brian? The guy who wrote the Beer Bible.
Oh my God.
His name
Jeff Alworth. I always want to call him Allsworth.
So Jeff Alworth was the one who, in the Beer Bible, has a whole section about the Hazy IPA, and he refers to
Patient Zero.
Refers to it as Patient Zero. I think I had Heady Topper for the first time a little bit too late. This was I think if I had had it before it became a trend, I would have been more impressed. It's kind of like when you see Citizen Kane for the first time in 1980, you have no idea how incredibly pioneering the movie was.
This movie's just full of tropes.
There are all these things that are tropes that it invented, because we've seen, all more modern things that are, and so similarly with Heady Topper is that I want to say it was 2017. I was visiting my sister in Vermont, and we're someplace near there. And I'm always looking at draft beers. And my brother-in-law said, that they've got Heady Topper on the can here. He's not really a beer guy. He said, I know a lot of people are excited about that. It's like, okay, I will have that. That was my first Heady Topper, and I liked it. But I think I'd had so many things that it influenced that I was not able to have that sense of awe and wonder as when they first burst onto the scene.
Yeah, I had similar experiences. I had all the bigger the other big New England IPA breweries, and eventually got a Heady Topper and a Focal Banger in Vermont, and it was like, this is great. I can see where this set precedent for all these other things that I love. But yeah, it wasn't that like aha moment like I had with, like, for me, Dale's Pale Ale and Sierra Nevada Pale Ale.
Yeah.
But let's get to my third. Actually, sorry, it's a list of 4 gripes now. My fourth gripe, and it's that Founders Breakfast Stout is not on this list. I really feel like Founders Breakfast Stout, or I mean, you could even say Kentucky Breakfast Stout, the bourbon barrel aged version, definitely should be on this list. You have Goose Island Bourbon County brand stout, the literal, the Patient Zero of bourbon barrel aged stout. They were the first to do it, and they did it in like 95.
Especially because even though, like, for the first few years that existed, it was a lot harder to find, but all brewers knew it, and that certainly helped start the trend. Like, in fact, well, that's the question, because Bourbon County is on there. Did Bourbon County exist before KBS?
Absolutely. Bourbon County was first released, I believe, in 1994 or 1995.
So I think an argument could be made that they might actually be the real pioneers of the barrel-aged stout.
They absolutely are. And that's why I think I'm going to stick with the stronger argument, in my opinion, and say that breakfast stout, Founders Breakfast Stout, an oatmeal stout brewed with coffee, chocolate, um, that deserves more of a spot on this list. You know, Bourbon County is that original bourbon barrel aged beer. I'll tell you why Dark Lord is on this list. I
Okay.
figured it out. Dark Lord Day is one of the biggest releases in the beer industry and has been for, I want to say, since the inception of the Dark Lord beer. It is this massive release that happens at Three Floyds. They have metal bands come and play. People line up for hours. They camp overnight. It's this whole big beer release that was hugely influential on beer releases as we knew them before COVID. They haven't
Okay.
really turned back into that, like, hey, let's all go and have a big ass party before we buy even more beer that we're then going to trade for other different beer. So like I think that's why Dark Lord's on there and deserves to be on there for that. But breakfast,
I'm actually going to say that some of that stuff, it's not on the same level as Rare, but but Goose Island does that with the Bourbon County Stout every like Black Friday. Like my local beer and cheese place, every like Black Friday they will do a big Bourbon County event, and they actually even did it during 2020 because they have before that it had always been sort of a deal where you'd go in and you could do a flight. They'd have 4 different ones there. But this particular place always had a backyard. And everyone was so excited. So that what they did was they did it entirely by reservation. They did like a flight and beer and cheese pairing. And you could, for extra, you could get the goodie bag to take all the selections home with you. And it didn't matter that it was late November and we were all outside. We were just so happy to be anywhere pre-vaccine that we could all sit in the backyard of this place and at our individually scheduled times at our individually assigned tables have a flight of Bourbon County Stout and cheese.
yeah. And you know, Bourbon County definitely established that pretty early on in their releases of doing the variants and making it a special thing, especially in Chicago, which, you know, huge city. But I think another reason why Dark Lord Day, this is gonna be our last thought on Dark Lord Day before we move on to like the point of the topic, which was breakfast stout and founders and Grand Rapids, and tie it all back together. But Three Floyds is in Munster, Indiana, middle of nowhere. And I think people from all over Indiana, Missouri, Minnesota, Iowa, Nebraska.
Well, let's throw in Michigan and Ohio while we're at it.
That whole surrounding area would travel to Three Floyds for this thing, and it just blew up beyond their control. And I think that's kind of indicative of how a lot of craft beer trends took off in the 2010s and early 2020s. Was like, hey, let's try this thing that we think is going to be cool or that we think our customers are going to like, and then it just blows up. Such as
that is very that's very fair. My only skepticism was specifically because I was mad at myself because I'd never heard of it. And so my first thought was, I haven't heard of this. Why haven't I heard of this? Because this is a beer I would seek out, even though I'm in New York City. If I'd heard about Dark Lord Day, I might have told my dad I'd go visit him in Dayton and was like, oh, by the way, we're going to go to Munster tomorrow to camp out to get this beer.
Yeah, listeners of the podcast, somebody send Glenn some Dark Lord. I'm way beyond my trading days. Somebody mail Glenn some Dark Lord. Glenn will post his address in a very public place for people to find it, and you can just send it to him.
That's very safe. I want to go back to what we were talking about founders, because while we were talking about Heady Topper and Arrogant Bastard and all that, I would posit that founders may have had a big influence with their all day IPA. I don't remember ever hearing about a sessionable IPA before that is. And not only did they sort of start that trend, they managed to pick the best name for it that everyone else has been trying to come up with some other version of it since then, because there is no better name for an IPA that's also a lawnmower beer than all day IPA.
Yeah, and I'll throw a piggyback onto that. They also created the maybe fastest rise and fall package and trend in the beer industry, the 15 pack.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
All day IPA was the first 15 pack.
I did not know that.
Mm-hmm. And then those completely died off when COVID hit. But yeah, absolutely. All day IPA is hugely influential. Especially when you're talking about craft beers that saw wide distribution. It was
Yeah.
either IPA or pale ale in terms of hop forward beers, or double IPAs, imperial IPAs. 90-minute IPA had a very good distro, and
Yeah.
but there wasn't that gap bridger, which was the session IPA. It had that
Yeah.
bold hop character of an IPA, but was still palatable and crushable, and something that you could drink all day.
Yeah.
Hell of a branding over there.
It really is. It will always be the best name for any sessionable IPA.
You cannot
Can't beat it.
get a better name for that.
Yeah.
So yeah, Founders kind of got left off of this list. I think Glenn and I could make a case for two beers that probably should have been included on this list. And Breakfast Stout, I think, really was the precursor to all the pastry stouts, and a lot of the experimentation we're seeing with confectioners' ingredients in stouts nowadays.
And I would say, I would say the first time I had a breakfast stout, it was definitely a game-changing moment for me. I'd never tasted anything like it, and for quite a while, any place I'd be at, a place that had Founders breakfast stout, I'm like, that's what I'm having. It was just amazing.
KBS was the first whale for me. KBS was the first beer that I heard rumblings about, and then sought it out and had to okay, how am I going to get this beer? When is the release coming up? Who do I know which store is going to be able to carry it? And that's when I found out about working the network of stores, and finding the store that does well in other sales, that is going to most likely get the rare releases, and that whole whirlwind that infected my life for many years. But
Brian, have I told the story while the mics were running about my first KBS experience?
I don't think so.
Yeah, because I think we were talking about it a couple of weeks ago in our tech check. But no, this happened to me for a while, since I was so enamored of the breakfast stout, as well as so many other of their beers. Anytime a local place would have a tasting, where there'd be a bunch of Founders specific ones, I would go to, and I was there. And so anytime there's one of those things, the beer rep is there, and I'm talking to the guy about how I've never had the KBS, and he's a beer rep for Founders, but the way they work, of course, he lives in the neighborhood, but he's just a beer rep for Founders as well as another number of other people. So he actually invited me over to his place, which was a few blocks over from the bar, and he gave me. He just had a whole cellar, I went to a stranger and said, yes, I'll go down into your cellar. And so fortunately I got some wonderful beer rather than getting chopped into little pieces. And that was my first experience with the Founders breakfast stout, or for the Founders KBS, I should say. And it's gotten easier to find since then. Arguably it's not as good as it used to be, but that was how I first encountered the KBS.
Yeah, I mean, it eventually saw that wide distribution, and got, some would say saturated in the market. And
yeah,
but for people like us that were interested in craft beer at that time, it was one of the whales out there to seek out. And funny enough, have you ever heard the story of how Founders got its name?
I did not.
Yeah, so Founders, hugely influential brewery in our featured beer scene of the month, Grand Rapids. Founders was founded in 1997, originally as another brewing company, and then changed their name when they opened in 1997 to the Canal Street Brewing Company. It was an ode to a historical name of a Grand Rapids street where they set up their operations. So, a lot of the breweries we feature on here, they were like, this is an important place where we are. We're going to name the brewery after it. Cool. One of the first beers they released was a pale ale that had a historical image on it from the era, from the 19th century era, where, many of the breweries that existed in Grand Rapids existed on Canal Street in that day. I explained that in the worst way possible. They named it Canal Street because that's where they existed, but it's also where a lot of the breweries in the 19th century were located in Grand Rapids. There we go. Got it on the second take. And they released a pale ale and they called it the Founders Pale Ale because it had the images of the brewers. They tried to associate it with this Canal Street heart of brewing in the 19th century, and they saw these brewers that back then is the founders of Grand Rapids beer. So they called it Founders Pale Ale, and they stylized it on the bottle as pale ale on the bottom of the label, and just above that in like an arc, the word Founders. And everybody kept calling the brewery Founders. They just completely forgot that the place was called Canal Street Brewing Company, and every customer that bought it called it Founders. It was Founders Pale Ale. It was made by a brewery called Founders. So they were like, well, whatever, we'll just change the name to Founders.
That's a good story. That's a good story. Yeah. It's funny. I saw a headline last week for some brewery. I can't think of the name of it. It's not really important, but it was basically about some big conglomerate selling the brewery back to someone in North Carolina. They were selling the brewery back to the original people who started it. So it was going to become independent again. But what was weird was the headline in the article said so-and-so to sell brewery back to Founders. And they had way too many words capitalized in the sentence. I'm like, wait a minute, Founders used to own that brewery? I'm like, no, that actually meant to be a small f, Founders. They were selling it back to the founders of the brewery. So it was be careful with your capitalization, headline writers out there.
Yeah, watch your uppers and lowers.
Yeah,
they're important.
Just like the Oxford comma. But that's a whole other thing.
Hey, Glenn, I don't know if we talked about this on this show, but I was in school for journalism before I decided to become a beer nerd. And Oxford comma, underutilized, extremely important.
I'm very pro Oxford comma.
This is a pro Oxford comma podcast. We don't take many hard stands on here, but we are a pro Oxford comma podcast. So I think a point to maybe end this discussion on is what Founders has become. I think it's definitely not a fun subject, but Founders, like a lot of large regional breweries, struggled greatly during COVID. A lot of those large regional breweries make a lot of money off of what we call on-premise distribution sales. So the sales of kegs, bottles, or cans that are meant to be consumed on the premise in which they are sold. So bars, restaurants, stuff like that. When COVID came and bars, restaurants, and stuff like that went away, a lot of these big breweries took a hit. And that definitely took a hit on Founders' sales. They also got themselves mixed up in some hostile workplace environment lawsuits, particularly 2 of them. And Glenn, would you like to elaborate on that?
By 2, do you mean the one that you're including the one that started a couple weeks ago?
Including the one that just started
initially.
April?
This is the crazy thing. Like, I'll go to what's most recent and then move back to the beginning. A couple weeks ago, we were going to do an episode of the Beer Ventures podcast, and Ethan, as you all know him, known as the Beer Wonder on my podcast, he had said, "Oh, we need to talk about how Founders just closed their their Detroit tasting room." And I said, "Oh, that's too bad." So I went to look it up, just did a Google search, Founders news, and right next to the news about the tap room being closed is that they're being hit with another racial discrimination lawsuit. And this happened. I'm not sure what the time frame you were talking about the first one, but yeah, it was something about how there was someone in the company was suing them, who said that they got fired for racial discrimination, or they were always treated badly. I'm not sure exactly what the situation was, but in any case, they had a big lawsuit on their hands. And what they did to try and do that was that, first of all, they refuted it, but then they also said, "We're sorry, we're going to bring in some people to make us a better, positive, more work environment." And so they brought in a woman to help teach them how to be better. And then a few months later, she quit because she felt that, if I'm paraphrasing here, that essentially they were more concerned about the optics. They really didn't want to change how they did things. They just wanted to change people's perception of them. That was her take on that. And that's why she was not willing to work with them anymore. And it's been an ongoing problem. And there's also it's how the hashtag fuck founders got started on social
Yeah.
media. If you can go up and look up fuck founders, and you'll see all sorts of people with stories about, it's like it's not quite on the level of the rat magnet thing, but it's up there as far as social media hashtags really going after someone for. I almost don't want to say it this way because it sounds like it's minimizing it, but I would just say bad behavior. Bad behavior, I think, is the larger umbrella, even though bad behavior just sounds like something you're punishing your 5-year-old for. It's much bigger than that, but that seems to be what we're using to call them.
Yeah, terrible company culture.
Yeah.
In fairness to the lawsuits, the most recent one involved an employee that was passed over for multiple positions, was constantly made fun of for their name, and just felt like there was a culture of allowing a hostile workplace to develop around them
Yeah.
and cause them to quit. They weren't actually fired for discrimination or anything. That's not what the suit is focusing on. The suit, as a former HR person, I chose the words workplace harassment, or excuse me, hostile work environment very deliberately, because that's really what they're alleging and what they're suing for discrimination based on. And that hostile workplace environment included extremely racist employees, accusing employees of accusing employees of color of terrible behavior, passing them over for promotions. And as somebody that has worked in the HR field and worked with lawyers and attorneys about what it takes to bring a case like this to court, they must have a lot of evidence on their hands, because it's extremely difficult to bring one of these types of cases to court. And the fact that Founders has 2 lawsuits on their hand, one from 2018 and the most recent one, which Glenn mentioned already, is a sign that there is a serious problem there. Whether it's just racism or it's a culture of creating a hostile workplace for people that don't fit the mold of what some people think should be a brewery employee at Founders, it's a major red flag. And also, just to speak specifically about why they weren't included on the Grand Rapids episodes this month, we feature craft breweries, and Founders was actually bought by a ownership company called San Miguel Partners, which is not considered a craft brewery by the Brewers Association, and they have since had their craft brewery distinction removed. I think that was as far back as, I want to say that was like 2014 or 2015 that original like 30% ownership to San Miguel happened, and they removed that. And that's essentially why they weren't included here, is we try our damnedest to feature only craft breweries that are defined by the Breweries Association, or Brewers Association's definition of craft brewer.
Quite honestly, I think if we were to feature Founders, we would have to get them to curate something special for our members that you can't get in your grocery store, because you can pretty much get most of the founder. There's a bunch of Founders you can see in grocery stores all over the country, and that's nothing special for us to send in the boxes, are they? I love
Exactly.
a Founders Porter, but I can get that down the street.
Yeah, we have this issue with a couple of the breweries that we're going to be featuring in the next 2 months. Is we're featuring some breweries that are pretty well known, but we want to offer something that people may not necessarily see everywhere from those breweries, and give them a look at what a hugely influential regional brewery is also doing that's fun for their locals or their taproom customers.
Yeah.
Somebody's asking if Founders in Tiger Stadium closed.
I do not know.
I know they had a tap room in Detroit that closed. And that's what
Yeah,
Glenn
that's what we
was
were talking
referring to.
Yeah, I don't know if they I don't know what the status is on the one in Tiger Stadium.
I am quick Googling here and I can't find anything on it that's relevant and recent. So we're gonna stop this segment of Brian Googles on the podcast.
All right.
Yeah,
The valiant
so
effort.
the tumultuous, weird history of Founders there, and also kind of a plug for one of their beers, despite whatever
It's
their
complicated.
yeah, despite whatever bullshit may have taken place that allowed a culture like that to perpetuate. At one time, they were producing hugely influential beer, and I think it got left off this list. And there's no other Grand Rapids representatives on this list, and that's really another reason why that beer should be on here. Every other major beer city, Portland, San Diego, other Portland, Vermont, California, Chicago, all of these places are represent. Pennsylvania, Victory's on here twice.
Well, I feel like when we had the other Knicks episode, I don't remember the name of our guests, but they were both talking about how, not only it's influential on all the other breweries in Grand Rapids. She was
Yeah.
talking about how like all her friends worked for Founders, and she was trying to figure out, a different niche for the whole gluten-free thing. It's like there's no denying their influence.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so Dale is suggesting exactly what we were just suggesting, that wondering if maybe it's the controversy that kept them off the list. I generally, as far with beers go, it's so hard to do full on boycotts for every possible thing that's problematic. But I've definitely limited my rotation of having them, and there are a couple of bars in town that I know that I just don't have anything else that I like, and if they have Founders Breakfast Stout, I will probably still order that a few more times. But I'm much less likely to take home a 6-pack of Founders Porter from the grocery store than I used to, and not because they just recently changed the label to make it less sexy.
No, but
and this is not me being Tucker Carlson about the green M&M. They actually had a very attractive woman on but it's sort of like an old, like Victorian. I don't mean like tawdry. They had a woman on there, and sexy was actually in the tagline they used for it. And now they've got an entirely different logo, and the word sexy is nowhere to be seen. So,
well, I mean, Glenn,
I'm not going to complain about that. It's the same good beer.
They're not trying to touch any lick of controversy with a 20-foot
I guess that's
pool
it.
right now.
Yeah. We can't call our beer sexy.
Yeah, they're probably trying to do a rebrand of everything they possibly can, which is something we might talk about next week. Rebranding and changing names and
yeah. I'm looking forward to that. That's like what's a wonderful tease for next week.
Yeah, Glenn, plugs. Where can people find you if they want to hear more about you?
Well, we just released episode 78 of the Beer Vengers podcast, but you can find it at the Beer Vengers on all your socials. But basically any search you look for the Beer Vengers, you can find everything that we've done on there, including if you want to go all the way back to episode 9, you might get a preview of a beer we're featuring on this podcast next week. I have actually had one of those beers, but I'm not going to tell that story at all this week because I'm looking forward to telling it next week. So you can find us all on those places, like and subscribe at will, or you can find us at thebeervengers.com if you want to see all the pictures of all the beers we've had. Had a few more than we've had. Well, it's funny. A couple of weeks ago, when you were talking about how many you've had in 100 episodes, I realized, we've had more than that in 70 some. That's because we always have at least 3 people having at least 3 different beers on every single episode. So they add up.
Yeah. Well, also, Glenn, we don't count the beers that I drink and aren't featured beers on here.
Oh, well, yeah. No,
that number's much higher.
I'm quite sure.
But yes.
As far as I know, we've only repeated a beer once in 78 episodes, and that was by accident.
Oh, that's impressive.
Yeah, Beer Wonder brought one on. He somehow forgot that was in his refrigerator because anyway, it was and so it's like I said, it's not. It was I didn't want to correct him in the middle of the episode, but I have to admit, because of that one episode, I can't say we've never repeated a beer.
Well, that's fine. That's totally fine. Go check out the Beer Vengers at all the socials that Glenn just mentioned, at Beer Vengers.
The Beer Vengers.
Excuse me, at
Got to
the
make sure you
Beer
include
Vengers.
the. Yeah, we eventually. I think initially we toyed with it being Beer Vengers, but there was too much other thing. The Beer Vengers was the best we could do, so that's who we are. The Beer Vengers.
The gives it it gives the name a superhero, the equivalent of a superhero pose, like hands on hips, like fists on hips. Yeah,
we're most heavily featured on Instagram, but we're slowly and surely creating a presence on TikTok as well.
Guys, go see Glenn's TikToks.
Well, Mike Birch is more in charge of that, but yeah, you'll see a lot more Mike than me there.
Go see Mike's.
I'm working on it.
Friend of the show, Mike, and friend of the show, Ethan, and pretty much every Beer Venger is a friend of this show.
Well, yes.
Also friends of the show, Jess and Dale from Brewery Nix. Shout out to them again for supplying beer for both.
This is such a great beer. Yeah.
This episode. Yeah, this beer is fantastic. I'm pretty sure I have one more in the fridge of these. Go follow them at Brewery Nix on Instagram. Thanks again to them for supplying beers for this episode, as well as for our Beer Club subscribers. If you're interested in joining the Beer Club, you could head over to shop.citybrewtours.com and check out the subscription options there. You can also explore the perks and benefits of joining the Beer Club, such as getting local beers shipped to you on a monthly basis, getting to join the live stream as we record the episodes, as well as additional perks from City Brew Tours, the nation's oldest craft beer. The nation's oldest craft beer. I'm going to do that a third time.
All right.
The nation's oldest craft brewery tour company. Go over to shop.citybrewtours.com to find out all that information. And if you feel like it, support the show by becoming a subscriber. Next week, we will be joined by a special guest to close out our episodes on Grand Rapids. We'll be drinking 2 awesome hop forward beers. I think our first 2 hop forward beers of the month. And we'll be having another conversation about super influential breweries in Michigan, specifically one brewery called New Holland. But until then, stay safe, be kind, and support local breweries, everybody. Cheers.
Cheers, everyone.
Woo!